After the Boston Tea Party, King George sent thousands of British soldiers to Boston to make sure the colonists obeyed the king's orders. They swarmed the streets of the city in their fancy red uniforms with their shiny buttons, earning themselves the nickname the Redcoats. They carried weapons with them everywhere they went. This made the people of Boston very angry. The city no longer felt like home to them. They did not know whom to trust. Spies, or people who were sent secretly to watch on them, spread out all over the city. British soldiers disguised as colonists, and colonists disguised as British soldiers. There were lots of whispering in the streets as people kept secrets from one another. It was not very pleasant, and it was even a little scary. Paul Revere was a silversmith living in Boston. As a silversmith, he kept quite busy making and repairing silver dinnerware, candlesticks, and jewelry. A sign with a silver pitcher hung outside his shop on the town square. One day, the door to his shop flew open and a friend rushed over to Revere's side. The two men were both members of the Sons of Liberty, the group of patriots who had emptied the tea into the Boston harbor. Ever since the Boston Tea Party, the colonists of Massachusetts had been hiding weapons, gunpowder, and cannonballs in neighboring towns. The British, afraid the colonists might be planning to attack them, captured the weapons whenever they learned where they were hidden. Now, as the two men huddled together in the back of Revere's shop, his friend whispered that the British were planning to raid the colonists' storehouse of weapons in the town of Concord. The British were to travel that night, he said, but nobody knew whether they would march there by land or if they would choose the shorter route and sail on boat by sea. The patriots knew they must somehow warn the militia in Concord that the British were coming by sea. Revere and others spied on the British to discover the soldiers' plans. When Revere learned that the troops were coming by sea, he arranged for a signal to be given, a secret code. His friend was to climb up to the bell tower of the Old North Church, light one lantern and hang it in the belfry if the British are traveling by foot or by land, Revere told his friend, but if they're planning on traveling by boat or by sea, hang two lanterns. Paul Revere left his family and he crept down to the banks of the Charles River. He quietly crossed the river on a boat to a spot where he borrowed a horse from his friend and fellow patriot. Paul Revere mounted the horse, tipped his hat in thanks to the patriots, and sped away. As he galloped through towns along the way, Revere shouted to the colonists in their beds, "The Redcoats are coming! The Redcoats are coming!" All around him, shutters were thrown open as people began waking up in the middle of the night. When Revere reached the town of Lexington, with word of the approaching British troops, men hurried from their homes, joining one another with their muskets in the middle of the town. These men, known as Minutemen because they were expected to be ready to fight at a minute's notice, slept with their muskets and gunpowder beside their beds. Revere was joined by a second rider, William Dawes, who had been sent on the same mission but following a different path to Lexington. At dawn, the British reached Lexington. The Minutemen were farmers and shopkeepers, volunteers for their country, not trained soldiers. They looked ragged next to the well-dressed British soldiers or redcoats. In the confusion of the early morning hours, a shot was fired. Others fired back, and fighting continued throughout the morning. Finally, Minutemen were able to force the British to return to Boston, firing at them from behind rocks and trees and fences all along the way. To this day, no one knows who fired that first shot that day. Nerves had been on edge since the Boston Tea Party, so it was not surprising that guns went off. That first shot was the beginning of a long war between the British and their American colonies. It was known as the shot heard round the world because not only did it change the life in the colonies, but it also changed things around in the world in Great Britain all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. That long war became known as the Revolutionary War. Could it be that the shot heard round the world rang so loudly from Massachusetts colony that it actually reached King George's ears that April morning? What do you think?